why are Nazi gatherings not being fought at all? They are protected by the First Amendment. But there are limitations. If they cross the line, law enforcement can get involved. But simply gathering in meetings is not breaking any laws. It's not illegal to be an ignorant asshole. It's perfectly legal for Nazi assholes to gather together and hold up signs, etc. If a group of people shows up to beat them up, that's not at all legal, and then the cops will get involved. Not only do you risk arrest for it, but you run the risk of letting Nazis portray themselves as peaceful victims. The idea of punching a Nazi may be emotionally satisfying, but does it actually advance your cause more than it advances theirs? So you really want to give the government the right to break up political gatherings? They break up Nazis and we're happy. They break up socialist movements and some people are happy. They start breaking up the party that's not in power. Next thing you know, they're breaking up anything besides the gatherings that they created and you have no rights anymore. They will absolutely do this. Look at any dictatorship. No one is stopping you. It's easy to ask why others aren't while doing a lot of talk with no action yourself. If somehow Nazis took control by a polarity, if not majority, you would want to have the right to protest. Who gets to judge what is so offensive it does not merit the right to protest? The principle behind the First Amendment is to protect all political speech, except you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. I am not aware of any cases deciding the constitutionality of laws prohibiting hate speech, but just waving the flag probably wouldn't rise to that level. The Nazi rallies might even be educational, reminding people that democracy can be fragile, so let us all be vigilant. Freedom of speech. It's not just for you. Regardless of what your personal views are on the topic, the US has a very open policy regarding freedom of speech. Just because someone spouses hateful rhetoric that could lead to harm down the road, unless there is a direct call to violence, there is not much that can be legally done to intervene. You'll find that a lot of these protests have counter-protesters as well, so there's a fight there in a sense. If you're talking about a more government-sided intervention, the most you're reasonably going to get is some form of police interference to avoid things escalating between protesters and counter-protesters that could end up with them dispersing the crowds to avoid fights. You also have to consider that there is a ton of societal pressure in some circles against these sorts of movements, so there are fights consistently around those ideas, but they rarely end in use of force. It's important to prevent the shootings that you mention, but people can argue that you can deal with those through intelligence agencies like the FBI to monitor extremist groups and get ahead of the curve of terrorist attacks. You'll also have an easier time asking for some measure of gun control than with some form of limiting the free speech in the US, so the fight in the legislature tends to be there. Because having a policy of using violence to shut down speech you don't like is a cure that's worse than the disease. You're also touting an historical fiction. The day when Americans fought and killed Nazis was during the World War. And believe it or not, most soldiers were killing them because they were being shot at, not because of their political ideology. America was very cozy with anti-Semitism, eugenics, and authoritarianism in the 1940s. Freedom of speech and the right to assemble. Everyone has those rights. You do not get to pick and choose who is entitled to those rights, unless you wanna be a fascist. First Amendment. I'm guessing it wasn't promoted publicly in a way that would have given counter-protesters a chance to be there. In some places, people show up and counter-protest and quite often fights break out. But believe it or not, America isn't as progressive as some people think it is. Back in the 30s, we had Jewish gangsters who beat the living shit out of American Bund members, i.e. Nazi sympathizers. What I'm saying is, bring back the mob. People who shoot up schools and churches are fucked in the head in one way or another and pretty much don't care about their life. People who aren't Nazis have a good head on their shoulders, so they won't go and shoot up a Nazi rally and destroy their life. Well, look at what happened to the Black Panthers. They dared shoot back at the KKK and Nazis, and yes, they also did crimes, but kinda have to if you want to fight. And the feds came down on them hard. It doesn't help that the term Nazi has been used to label anyone who is right-leaning, which its overuse has watered down its potency to the point people go, "Oh, yeah, whatever, heard that one before." Because it's like a handful of loser edgelords who show up and wave some flags around and disappear. Can't really do anything about it except see it occasionally on the internet and roll my eyes. And why would I shoot them? Grinning face with smiling eyes and sweat drop that would get me arrested. We are combating them, but we do so through civic engagement and voting. Was the Nazi gathering advertised beforehand? If people didn't hear it was going to happen or there wasn't time to organize a counter-protest, that could easily be why. It was also an event at the state capitol, so there would presumably be a heavy police presence and lots of cameras, which would perhaps incentivize those who would normally show up to make the Nazis uncomfortable not show up. Also, we typically marginalize Nazis by not giving them too much of our attention. Part of their propaganda is that white people are persecuted, so why give them material to be justified in that belief in their minds? It's often better to let them have their idiotic clown show while the rest of us do the real, multi-generational work of dismantling the racist systems they wish would be preserved. You can't just up and kill people just because they think differently than you. You have to wait until they actually do something.